Let me back up a sec because if you blink, you'll miss how quickly a regular Tuesday morning can flip on its head, especially when it comes to respect, or the lack of it, for someone who's given more to this country than most people will ever know. You walk into Summit Ridge National Bank expecting nothing more than a routine transaction, but by the time you leave, the air is heavier, something unspoken hanging between everyone who witnessed what happened. That's what sticks with me, you know what I mean? That the line between ordinary and unforgettable is thinner than a piece of paper. Robert Keene Bobby to his friends wasn't the type to chase recognition. He wasn't there to make a scene or dredge up old battles or show off medals, though he had every right to do so. On that particular morning, all he wanted was to withdraw a couple $100 from an old account he'd barely touched since the years he spent overseas, fighting in places most people only read about in footnotes, if they ever heard about them at all. The same account he'd used to deposit hazard pay for missions the government still pretends never happened. So there he was, pressing open the glass doors with steady hands, well, as steady as decades of cold nights, too much adrenaline, and a bit of arthritis allow. Black cap on, gold thread catching the morning light. Korea/Vietnam veteran. Press shirt, a coat a little threadbare at the cuffs, and tucked in the pocket, a folded VA card, some old discharge papers, and a brass challenge coin with the Thunderbird and 7 stars worn down like the hands that carried it. He waited in line, quiet, respectful, the kind of patience you only get when you've learned that waiting your turn is still sacred. But when Bobby finally reached the counter, you could feel the air in the lobby change. The teller called to have been older than 25 looked at the account name and hesitated, shooting a glance up like she'd never seen paperwork that old. Bobby slid his ID across, hands trembling no with fear, but because time takes its toll, no matter how tough you are. Just trying to withdraw a bit, he said, polite as ever. It's been a while. She gave this thin, uneasy smile, tapped away on her keyboard, then paused. Something didn't fit. She flagged her menagerie guy, named Caden, all slicked hair and attitude, his tie knotted too high, and a look that said he thought he was the smartest person in the room. Caden barely glanced at Bobby's paperwork before snorting. "You sure this is your account, sir?" He dragged out that last word, made it sound like a punchline. "This discharge form looks like it came off a dinosaur." The teller laughed, but it was forced, like she knew she shouldn't, but went along anyway. Bobby just quietly reached into his pocket and placed that old challenge coin on the counter. It was the kind of coin that, if you knew, you knew. But Caden didn't even look. "Cute trinket. Anyone could buy these online," he muttered. Then he motioned to the security guard, "Let's get this guy out. Another wannabe vet trying to scam the system." Now, most folks in that bank did what people hey, looked at their phones, pretended not to see, maybe smirked a little. Bobby didn't protest. He picked up his coin, tucked it back into his coat, and walked over to a bench by the window, sitting straight and still, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. You could almost feel the discomfort ripple through the lobby. It wasn't guilt, not yet, just that cold sense you get when something's off but no one wants to say it. Except one woman, Maya Rodriguez. Early 30s, sharp, with that posture you see in people who've served. She'd done time in the Air Force, logistics, now working in defense contracting. She'd seen a coin like that once back when a retired JSOC colonel dropped one on a conference table and every officer in the room stood at attention. Maya walked up, eyes on Caden. "You just made a mistake," she said, cool and even. Caden rolled his eyes. If he's so important, why is he alone? She didn't argue, just stepped outside and made a call. Meanwhile, in the back, an older employee, one of those folks who's been around forever, knows all the stories but never brags, heard the name Robert Keene, and quietly moved to the wall where an old brass plaque hung. Engraved on it were the names of the original Summit Ridge Command Base founders. And right there, clear as day, R.J. Keene, the guy who'd overseen the military's transformation of that land before the bank even existed. The employee didn't say a word, just picked up the phone and called a number only a few people even knew existed. "It's Bishop Coyne, Summit Ridge. He's here." Then he hung up. Outside, Bobby sat watching the flag flutter across the street, waiting for recognition, not for an apology, just waiting because that's what men like him do. 30 minutes later, the room would be different. Down the road, A general in full dress was already ditching his own meeting, barking orders, and getting into a black SUV, hell-bent on making sure the man being mocked in that bank would never be ignored again. The next 20 minutes crawled by. The teller kept her head down. Caden paced nervously, no one really sure what was about to happen. Maya's call had reached a retired command contact who, as soon as he heard Bishop Coyne and Robert Keene, told her, "Don't let him leave." Back in the bank, the silence had turned from awkward to electric. You could feel it like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to break. That's when the glass doors flew open. Not a regular entrance, more like a warning shot. Boots hit the tile reel boots, the kind that carry history with every step. Major General Everett Kane, ribbons shining, eyes sharp, uniform pressed like he'd stepped straight out of a recruitment poster. He scanned the room once, then walked straight to Bobby, snapping a salute so crisp the sound alone was enough to hush the whole building. Bobby, caught off guard, stood and returned the gesture with a grace you only see in legends. Then the general turned, voice like gravel low, but cut right through the tension. "Who here called Colonel Robert Keene a fraud?" Every head turned to Caden, who looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him. "I didn't know his papers were old. Of course they're old," Kane snapped. "He earned that age fighting for your freedom while you were learning to schedule tweets." That stung. The room went from shame to reverence in a heartbeat. Kane's aide opened a briefcase, laying out a thick file, a commemorative coin, and a photo of the same plaque hanging on the bank wall. The account you doubted funded the original supply lines. He turned to Bobby, voice softer now. "Sorry, we didn't know you were here sooner, sir." Bobby nodded. "Didn't come to be found. Just needed some cash to help my grandson with school." The general nodded back. "Let's take care of that." And suddenly, the whole bank seemed to move with a different kind of respect. Caden backed away. The teller's hands shook as she processed the withdrawal, whispering apologies Bobby didn't need. He slipped the receipt into his pocket like it was any other errand. But as he turned to leave, Kane put a hand on his shoulder. "Colonel, you've got 5 minutes." "For what?" Bobby asked, a bit confused. "For the honor you never asked for." And like a movie, every veteran in the building, young reservists, old Navy guys stood and saluted. Even civilians rose, silent, because sometimes you just know you're in the presence of something bigger than yourself. Bobby paused, not with pride, but with this quiet disbelief, and slowly returned the salute. Then Kane reached into his coat and handed him a small velvet box. "Been holding on to this for years. Thought you should have it now." Inside was a medal, engraved simply, "Service Beyond Record." Bobby stared at it for a long time, then nodded, no words, just the weight of a lifetime in his eyes. "Didn't come here to be remembered. Came to keep a promise," he said. Kane nodded, "And you reminded us all what service really means." Bobby walked out into the sunlight. No cameras, no headlines, just the quiet aftermath of something true. Later that week, a new line was added to that brass plaque at the bank, Robert J. Keene, Colonel, U.S. Army, honor and silence. No mention of the incident. No mention of the general. But everyone who was there knew. And now, every person who walks through those doors sees the name of the man they almost laughed out of the building. What do you think, really? When is enough enough? Where does respect begin and who gets to decide? Drop your thoughts below because this is the kind of story that shouldn't just be a memory, but a conversation.